It's really difficult to do, but I think that if you can just stay the course, for the long haul, God's timing will really show and the plan will really fall into place.
Having Jesus in the forefront of my life, I have zero fear. I have zero fear of where's my next check coming from, where's my next client coming from, what's going to happen next, because God removes the fear from me and says, hey, follow me and I'll set you free.
But nonetheless, it all comes from the Spirit of God. If you're true to who you are, if you're listening to the voice of God, you're following the leadership of God, all of those things will come together.
For me, the key is to really surround yourself with godly men.
I think our only purpose here is to help people see that God is real and that Jesus is alive.
Yeah.
We truly are in a partnership with God. If you really want to learn to have faith in Jesus and to grow in your relationship with Jesus, become an entrepreneur.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Kingdom Business Interviews. On this podcast, we're all about unlocking the faith in entrepreneurship. Today, I've got Evan Renfro with me. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I did that perfect. And he owns a media company, correct? What all exactly do you do?
Yeah, so essentially, I like to refer to it as a boutique video creative company.
I like that.
But effectively, it's video marketing for mid-sized businesses, creative ads, brand films, and things like that.
So for those of you that are new, that don't know much about my podcast, I say we're all about unlocking the faith in entrepreneurship. And so what that means basically is if you are an entrepreneur or just a young entrepreneur or of any age, and you're struggling with your faith and you're struggling in business and you are looking to, just get advice from people that have been through it, people that have gone before you, and to just, kind of have something you can relate to and something to kind of encourage you to just keep pushing through and keep fighting and keep the faith. That's what we're about here on this podcast. And so I want to go ahead and start off just by getting to know you a little bit better, Evan, and just so the audience knows, kind of who Evan is.
Yeah, it's a fun one. Well, like I said, I've been doing this for about 3.5 years. Prior to that, I did work at the church. I spent a couple of years on staff at the church. And prior to that, I spent 10 plus years in the fitness and nutrition space. So I share all that kind of like work history, work experience, because like in these seasons, we have a family of 5 now. I've got 3 young kids. I've got an amazing wife. I always tell people I'm tolerable. She's a saint. She's incredible. She's my better half. She's amazing. And we've got, a 7-year-old. Our daughter will be 4 in 2 days.
That's
and then
awesome.
We have a 16-month-old. So we're in a really, it's a lively season of life that we're in. Just bought a house. Really blessed to kind of be where we are. But yeah, through the course of this, it's always kind of been, I look at it as like every season of our life, there's been some sort of growth or change. And both she and I are I think pretty aware of what's going on in our lives, like being able to look for lessons or look for things that we're learning and growing in. But with that said, I spent 10 plus years in a fitness industry that kind of grew a little temporal and vain for me. Mm-hmm. It just kind of felt, I didn't want to wake up at 60 something and having to go train clients. So I kind of had this realization that that's not the industry I wanted to be in forever. So why was I staying in that industry?
Right.
And again, kind of with that feeling of it felt very vain by nature. And I'm not projecting that on all people who are in the fitness industry. There's people who are really doing an incredible job and changing people's lives and helping to instill good habits. But for me, at least, and kind of what I was surrounded with, it just felt like I needed to change. And I've always been interested in visual storytelling. I've always been drawn to cinema, movies and shows and things that really, they captivate you with good story. Sometimes our most profound, impactful moments and lessons come through good story.
Yes.
And while I knew nothing about the technical side of it, didn't even know how to use a camera, I knew that that's an industry that really interested me. And in that course of those 10 years in the fitness space, I had developed, out of a bit of necessity, I had developed an interest for marketing, because if you don't have any clients, you don't eat, right? So
right.
Kind of grew in that space, grew in that interest.
I think I'm interested in marketing now.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, it's one of those things, if you're in business for yourself, I think regardless of industry, if you can't communicate what it is you do and you're effectively obsolete, no one can know that you can serve them or help them or provide them a solution.
Makes it impossible to sell.
Exactly.
Yeah.
See, that was kind of the course to get to, I guess, like I said, 3-4 years ago. And I've still been learning and growing. Like, I remember when I first started, I was volunteering at first at the church on the media and creative team because I wanted to learn about cameras. I didn't know how to use them. And it was my first big shoot to be part of. I'd never been around production. And I'm someone who's like, I don't like to feel like I'm not contributing. So I just stepped right in and started doing stuff. And I'm screwing cameras on these stands, and I'm feeling pretty proud, you know? I'm like, I've got 3 cameras set up. I'm looking around at what I can do next, and then I hear the creative director kind of came over and looked, and I don't think he knew that I did it, but he said, "Oh, is this what we're doing now?" Kind of implying that's not how you set up the cameras. But I had screwed cinema cameras, onto light stands. So yeah, just to show you how little I knew about what I was doing. So they had to undo everything I had touched and redo it the right way. And then I kind of stepped in the back, and for a moment I kind of thought like, am I even in the right industry? Like,
oh, dude, I bet in like that moment was just like, oh man,
yeah, humbling. But again, I share that as a funny reminder of saying,
that's awesome.
like, now it's like this is what I do as my full-time career, and like God's been so great to show. To kind of just show me an opportunity or put people in my life that I can learn from, and just time and time again over the course of these years just to allow me to be where I am today. But yeah, that's kind of the jumbled version of the story and journey that got me to where I am today.
That's awesome, man. Let me ask you this. What are some of the biggest hurdles that you've had to overcome, that you've gone through with, transitioning into going full-time on your own business and, having that worry in the back of your mind and just in your mind, period, of like, hey man, am I going to be able to pay the bills or not? Have you ever been in that position?
How much time do we have? Yeah, no, I honestly, to be completely transparent, like that's the reality that has existed, like all the way to now and still to this day. Like,
yeah.
God has blessed us, so I don't want to make it seem as if we're like struggling to survive, because he has certainly blessed us, but there are still, it's very like the reality of it still very much is like there's a need for continued growth and for continued progression. And I remember early on when I first started, I was the sole provider, the only income in the home. At the time we had 2 kids. We didn't have our second daughter, our third child yet, but we, still like providing for a family with an unproven business, like a brand new business that I had never done before. Like, it's a struggle. Like some days you question yourself. Some days you're I'll say this, the biggest thing that I struggled with and still do from time to time is feeling almost a sense of guilt or a burden of I'm bringing my family with me on this journey.
Yeah.
So if there are challenges, the lows, it always kind of makes me, I feel a little bit of guilt, of like, well, they didn't ask for this. This is what I chose.
Right.
But, one of the things I'm reminded of continuously, and I vividly remember like when I first made the decision, I've got the whiteboard at home. I'm writing out like our financial needs and commitments and what I would need to make as a business for it to be viable. And, you're working the math out in your head, and you're like, okay, well, if this person commits and if this person signs up for, some content and, they stay a client, I can maybe squeeze enough to make this work. And you're kind of looking at it with this, hopefully objective lens to say like, okay, like these things could line up and make this a success. But there's still that massive leap of faith, because most of those scenarios are like, if this happens, they're not proven and they're not guaranteed.
Right. Yeah.
But I remember this like vivid imagery that I had at the time of kind of like walking a tightrope. And I just remember like I described it, in a small group at the time, of just like this like reminder of faith is just for me. It was just kind of like this step after step, and keeping my eyes fixed on Jesus like the whole time, because as soon as I look down and I take my gaze off of him, like I fall.
Yes.
Right? So not obsessing over my circumstances or the what if scenarios or really letting myself kind of get bogged down in this anxiety and worry, but keeping my focus on him and just knowing that like the opportunities will be provided when they're needed and when they're right. And it is my job to just work toward that and kind of remain, like I think remaining disciplined and having a good work ethic, but at the same time not letting that worry and anxiety dictate your decisions and actions.
And that's what he calls us to do. And that's basically you're just, as long as you obey God, in your path, then, that's really the only thing that's going to be guaranteed is that you're going to be okay. So I like how you talked about like, it's like, it's not guaranteed that we're going to be able to land this deal and we're not going to profit. The profit's not guaranteed, everything like that. And so you're kind of worried and you're like, okay, man, well, what if this doesn't work out? Yeah. Well, it's like, I think the deception that's in the world right now is like your 9 to 5 could fall off tomorrow.
Exactly.
And everybody's so we'll get a steady job and do this and do that. And it's like, well, get a guaranteed paycheck. Yeah. It's like, well, it's not really guaranteed. That's a lie.
Yeah.
That's a lie that we've been sold. So I think it's super interesting how that kind of like threads in together.
Sure. As
far as the struggles, which one specifically would you say you could pinpoint and say has been like the hardest to overcome?
I would say it's like, I would give an answer of like 1A and 1B. The 1A is like a continual thing, and that's like me being in my own head, right? Everybody talks about like imposter syndrome and this and that of like, you maybe don't question and doubt yourself so much as you maybe question and doubt like, who am I to speak to something with authority, right? Or to present my services in such a way that they do have like that esteem, right? So we are our own worst critics, right? So that's kind of that one, I would say that's the continued thing. And it's not like one big grand challenge, it's just a continuation. Yeah. And kind of how I feel like, the Lord's helped me kind of combat that is with the reminder that like he has wired within us like a unique array of interests and passions and skills. Yeah. And everything that's led to this point, to where we are today, has equipped us for what we are in today, right? So like, and this is the other thing too, is like we don't need to be like perfect at these things. We only need to be more advanced than those that we're serving, right? Because if we're a little bit further ahead, or we have a little bit more knowledge, or we have a little bit more experience, or even a different perspective, or some unique, curated, assortment of these things that they don't have but they need, people are like happy to hire you to do that thing. And then the 1B, like the second part, is kind of like a scenario or situation that happened. I like to think that I put myself into all the work that I do. And as a creative, it's tough sometimes and you get that critical feedback. Yeah. But kill your darlings, right? You have to be willing to look at, this is what they hired me to do. So ultimately they get the final say and what's polished and finished. But I remember there was a client that I was working with, and I had just poured so much time and energy, just hours of just devoting and bringing my skills to serving this client. Had done a number of videos for them, worked for months on this, and after delivering everything, they never paid, and they just stopped responding. So it was like this, just it was all these things magnified in terms of the challenge, because like you feel like, oh, well, I feel really used, right? Taken advantage of, like I've leveraged my skill set and they've just taken it and used it and haven't compensated, for it. And on the other hand, it's like, well, I'm responsible for providing for my family, and now that's thousands of dollars that I'm not going to get, and they're not even responding. And so that was a tough season. I went back and forth with it. And what's interesting is like, it came up in conversation with another client of mine, who's a really successful, just esteemed business attorney in Dallas. And while we're talking, just like you and I, he's drafting up this demand payment letter just like it's nothing. And he assured me basically that like there's no question I could recoup, like they would be required by law to pay me. And he drafted up that letter, gave it to me. What would have cost, like attorney fees would have been significant. He just did it as a friend. But I never gave the client that letter. I held on to that letter because I just felt like almost this sense of like, okay, move beyond it. Because however long it would take to take them to court and fight it and just go through the sludge of that, like, honestly bad experience, I'm willingly putting myself backwards into a scenario that's not going to be fruitful. I mean, outside of the money owed, like, what do I gain from it? So all that to say, like, yeah, I just kind of felt like the Lord put on my heart to just cut my losses, walk away from it, and move towards something more productive, that's more fruitful. So yeah, I mean, it was a challenging experience.
Yeah, that is tough, and I feel like a lot of people, especially people that are weak in the faith, that probably would have been a end of the road for them, and so when you keep your roots deep in the Lord and Jesus, and just knowing that, hey, do the right thing no matter what, in the long run you'll be all right. And so fast forward after that, what are some like turning points after that period in time where you were like, okay, this is good, where it kind of reassured you, where God like told you like, hey, like you made the right decision by just keeping that letter and by not pursuing that and just focusing on staying on the path?
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest thing was like I realized, I mean, it wasn't even days after, I just kind of felt like this burden lifted in terms of like I wasn't held back by that scenario anymore. Like I could kind of walk past it and move beyond it.
Well, let me ask you this, just to backpack off of just that. Do you think that was just like the forgiveness?
I think so. Yeah.
Towards the client that did you wrong?
Exactly. And I had, it's funny because it wasn't that I like never told anyone about it, because people would ask like, hey, I haven't seen you do much work for this client anymore. What's going on? And I told people like I don't feel like it's my place to protect them if they are doing shady business dealings. Like I don't want any other business to have that same experience. So I would just share the reality of the situation. But I say that to say like a couple of people that I have, either past clients or friends that knew about the situation, like one of them asked about it not long after, and I told him the same thing, that I chose not to present that demand payment letter and not to pursue legal action. And he flat out said, "You're crazy." He said, "I would have gone, I would have ripped him for everything and taken the money." And I said to him, like, I just felt like in that moment, I was like, yeah, but like in my spirit, I feel so much more peace about it.
Right.
I feel like the Lord put it on me, put it on my heart to just kind of like forgive them, like you said, and then but also just like let go of it all.
Yeah.
And I
use
remember
that time and energy to focus, and then what opportunities would you may have stolen away from yourself if you were to pursue that in that time.
Exactly. And it's like, regardless of how much of a sure thing it would have been, legally, it's still it's still going to eat up time and energy and mental bandwidth, and we can't operate from a place of like optimism,
revenge,
and positivity. When we're in that place of revenge, and like. It wasn't long after that I landed like the best client that I've had to date, and I was in this space of just like better capacity from an ideation and a mentality standpoint. Like I had more space to create, and just from like it truly did feel like a weight was kind of shed.
That's
and it was
amazing.
like moving forward to what God ultimately has bigger and better things ahead, right?
That's awesome, dude. Because I mean, it talks about it in the Bible where you forgive, like it's really for you.
Yeah.
Like it's not for the person that did you wrong. Like that forgiveness is not for them; it's for you.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's an amazing example, like testimony towards forgiveness within itself, just right there. And I love how we can kind of incorporate it into business, and how it's kind of positively affected your business too. So moving forward from that, what were some of the opportunities like in that moment that came from that? Like you said, like your buddy like saw, he said, hey, like why would you not pursue them? Was it a client you said? It was another client?
He's a friend and a client. Yeah.
Okay.
He's both. Yeah. And
so do you feel like that, making the decision that you made opened up and was actually like, it was like a blessing in disguise?
I think so. Yeah. And honestly, like I came home and I told my wife later that day about our conversation, and I think what's always opportunistic in hindsight, we don't realize in the moment, but like who knows what that conversation could have led to. And I think at the end of the day, like it's our responsibility, or it's our privilege, honestly, to be able to be modeling how the Lord shows up in our
I
lives.
love that
right?
perspective too, about how it's our privilege.
Yeah. And like, we try to teach our kids the same thing, like how grateful we are that the Lord has allowed us to know him. And just, for me, I'm not saying that, I preached a great sermon or anything. It's just like a conversation, right? Where I was able to kind of share a situation that he was privy to. Like, he knew about the critical details of the situation, and for him to be able to see that doesn't make any sense on paper, right? Like, from man's perspective, that's foolish, that's silly. It must be something else. So to say the Lord put it on my heart to forgive and walk away. At the end of the day, that's what it's about, right? Trying to just be vessels and allow him to work through us. And I think that was a great opportunity for me to kind of get out of the way and let him do that.
Man, if you're comfortable sharing with just to kind of give context to the amount of worldly success that you've had here with your business. What's the most amount of money that you've ever made in a single year since you've gone on your own, since you've gone full time on your business?
No, I think
if you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, to me, I look at money as it's a resource. Whatever number I share, to some it'll be a lot, and to some it'll be a very little amount.
Right.
So it's relative, right? But year one, I think we cleared just over 104,000.
Oh, dude, that's awesome, man.
Thank you. And then year two, I think it was just shy of 160,000. So this is in year three. We're in year three now.
So there's growth. There's growth.
Yeah, there's growth. And
so what year was it? Did the client not pay?
That was in the beginning of year two. The very beginning of year two.
So you still had growth there. So that shows it. The numbers don't lie.
So tongue in cheek, right? You could have added $10,000 to a little bit less than $10,000 to that top line.
Yeah.
But I mean, I look at
that's
it
amazing.
The resources, right? And it's when in my younger years, I would have very much been almost attached to a certain amount as achievement or success, right? Like my level of contribution is directly predicated on the amount of money I'm making and bringing home. And in my ripe old age now, the Lord's kind of helped me to grow and mature in that way. And it's like I still, and I will unapologetically say, I want to make an obscene amount of money. I want to make an obnoxious amount of money, because I feel money in the hands of a believer is better stewarded than in the hands of a
Absolutely,
non-believer.
100%. Better steward you are, the more you get in the better the impact.
Exactly.
The better your impact is.
Exactly.
That's the word I was looking for. You can have a more positive impact if you have more money.
Yeah.
Cool. So
there's some pretty significant, levers you can pull with resources when it comes to contributing to a cause or solving problems, changing lives. That to me, and I say that, and I'll say kind of the equal part to that in terms of the motive behind it goes back to what I shared before of kind of what combats that self-doubt or that imposter syndrome is remembering that okay, the Lord has wired me a certain way, right? It's my responsibility to steward whatever he's created me with in terms of skills, abilities, even where we live. There are people who don't have access to the things that we have from a resource perspective.
Right.
We can create something for effectively no money today. That wasn't a possibility 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So to be able
Absolutely.
to leverage those things and contribute, take all of those things and contribute in such a way where it does benefit people beyond just myself. I say that, I unapologetically, I am wanting to serve as many people as I can, to grow the business as much as I can, because that is a resource that can help and contribute in a big way.
And I feel like it's also, like we were talking about earlier, it's a commandment from God for us to pursue, to serve. And it's the more resources that you have, the better you can serve people. And that kind of, what you were just talking about kind of leads me into my next question, which is, how do you incorporate biblical principles into your business strategies and decision-making processes? Yeah,
I think for me, this one is kind of It may be harder for some people, I guess, depending on the industry that they're in. But to me, as someone who's self-employed, like, if you're the face of your business, like, who you are is who you are, right? Whatever hat you wear. You know, for me, if I'm a husband, a father, a business owner, a friend, a son, like whoever I am is that's who I am wherever I go. So to say that, it's like the same core principles, my foundational beliefs, my faith that should guide me in any aspect of my life should also be guiding me in my business decisions. And there are times where things seem like decisions seem challenging to make. You know, if there's a choice to make and it's a big one, it could impact something significantly one way or another. Those are the obvious ones that you pray over. You know, we're kind of like conditioned to like, oh, this is a big weighty decision. Let's slow down, take some time, process it, and pray over it. But I think it's just as important in the small daily decisions, like the almost redundant, routine type decisions. But, you know, for that to be said, it's like, yeah, it's like whoever you are, whatever hat you wear, at the core of who you are, it should carry into that. That's what I believe, at least.
I love that. I think you answered that really well. So let me ask you this. Can you share like a pivotal moment in your life, not only just like in business, but in like your personal journey, like walk with God? Like, what was the pivotal moment in your life where you were like, Jesus is real? Have you ever had a moment where like he just talked to you, where you felt like he just spoke to you for the first time in a certain type of way? The reason I'm asking is for personal, because I've had one of those moments.
Yeah.
And it was actually when Dr. Tony Evans came and spoke at Lake Point Church.
Yeah.
The first time I ever saw him speak, first time I ever even heard of Dr. Tony Evans, and he spoke about marriage, because it was for marriage night.
Yeah.
And he spoke about what it means, you know, and how marriage is like a covenant from God. And he spoke about the roles and responsibilities, the biblical roles and responsibilities of a husband and a wife. And like that moment in my life, seeing him, like I felt like God spoke to me through that man. And ever since then, I've just had this just super powerful pull to want to seek God and want to learn the Word and dig into the Bible and everything. And so have you ever had a moment like that in your life? And then on top of that, you know, how has that benefited you in your business later on?
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. It's always incredible to hear like how God has shown up in other people's lives. Like for me, I can think of like many times, but some of the most like profound or most impactful. One was honestly at my lowest, like my wife and I both, like the most difficult thing we have ever experienced and likely will ever experience. When we lost our first son.
Oh man, I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. We were at 31 weeks. She had a placental abruption. You know, long story short, he spent 2 days in the NICU, Jackson. And
that's my son's name.
I love the name. It's a
Wow.
beautiful name. So spent 2 days in the NICU.
Man, that's amazing.
It was rough, man. You know, and it still hurts every day. Like that's my first child, my son. And ultimately, at the end of that, we both just felt like we had both been believers most of our life by that point, right? Like we came to faith like early on in our lives. Like this was not the first challenge we had ever faced, but it's the largest one we'd ever faced.
Yeah,
and
that one probably had you questioning God there.
It had, I think, for me personally, like I never questioned God, or I never questioned like my faith. I more so just kind of felt like a sense of anger. And at the same time, like I will always remember just how, and we both talked about this, my wife Courtney and I both talked about how we felt just blanketed with prayer in that season. I mean, like it's all kind of a blur for me. You know, we didn't do much. Obviously, every day just kind of felt like this heavy, just almost like a cloud. And it was hard. It was really hard. But at the same time, there always felt to be like this, just like the best way I can describe it is just like this blanket of prayer, just like knowing that we were loved and supported and cared for, not only by a God who loves us through our highs and our lows, but like a community that he had blessed us with. And then later, we found out from so many people, unprompted, at different times, that like they were praying daily for us, and like we were, there was someone even came to our home and walked around our home and prayed around our home and like didn't know about it. It's just like all those little things of just reassurance, right? And I think strengthening the faith. And in that season of yes, there was definitive anger. We've also, like, my wife and I both have talked about this, like neither of us have ever felt a greater depth of like intimacy in our relationship with the Lord. Like we've never felt more near to him than that season. And I think, I think it's a C.S. Lewis quote, like, and I'm butchering it, but it's like, it's hard to say that a man truly knows the Lord until he experiences great, the depths of grief and loss.
Yeah.
Or great loss. But it's like, I think that is where you really meet the Lord, is in those, like, you realize the frailty, the fleeting, just brokenness of man, in the gap between a holy and perfect sovereign God is never more evident than when we are broken in our lowest. So that was one, and
it's eye-opening too. It's like, okay, no matter what happens, God's there.
And it's like that kind of led us. I remember, like, we were sitting on our back porch, my wife and I, and kind of coming out of that fog a bit, and we both looked at each other and made a promise, and we were like, this is the worst thing we could ever live through. So we kind of made an agreement that, like, we wouldn't be fearful of anything ever. If there was something that we felt the Lord put on our heart to pursue or to do, that we would do it. And we would, like, put fear to bed, and we would pursue that thing, because, like, what else is there to fear if this is the hardest thing we'll ever live through? So that was one big one. And then
You made me cry, bro.
It's just like he continues to just, honestly, he just continues to bless us beyond what we deserve. And then he shows up all the time, honestly. Like, financially, there will be times where it's like something comes up unexpectedly, and I'm not sitting on like a massive reserve of cash, right? Like something that wasn't accounted for comes up, and it's like God provides something that we didn't even have on our radar, and it's like there's no other explanation for it. And it's things like that. It's the big things and the small, like he's just continually there.
I feel like just you sharing that, and just knowing that, in the audience and me, even me, just hearing that brings so much gratitude into my heart, so much gratitude, just to realize that, like, a lot of the things that you're going through, man, they don't even compare to what somebody else might be going through, or what they've gone through. Yeah. And so it's like, even in y'all's situation, there's people that have gone through worse situations. And I'm not trying to downplay what happened to you guys whatsoever, because that's worse than anything that's ever happened to me. And I almost just burst out into tears hearing that story. But just the fact that you shared that, and people to know that, like, hey, the struggles you're going through, somebody's gone through.
Yeah, exactly.
If not worse. Yeah. And just to see you where you're at now today, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, business, financially, like, after going through that, man,
thank you.
That's a huge testimony. That's a huge positive driving force impact on somebody's life right there. It has been for me. So I'm super glad, super grateful for you to share that. But let me ask you this, after that, like, would you say that all of the prayer was the main thing that got you guys through it, or would you say that kind of struck a drive or a pull in you guys to kind of really seek the Word and actually try to better understand God and have a closer relationship with Him? I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how I would overcome a situation like that, man.
What I want to be cautious to not do is to sit here and take credit for any of it. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I don't want to say, oh, I did this and I did that and we did this because of how great we are. It almost felt, and I don't know if this is going to make sense or not, but it almost kind of felt like we were just pulled to certain things. Like I remember, it was like a day or two after we had just left the hospital, you know, we buried our son, and then that evening we were at my in-laws. So my wife and I, my mother-in-law, father-in-law, and then brother-in-law and sister-in-law, and we were on their back porch, and like my brother-in-law and sister-in-law used to lead worship at their church in California, and they led worship at their church here. So he had like his cajon with him, and we just all sat on the back porch and just like had like a worship session with just our family. We're singing, playing the cajon, like just no part of me would have wanted to do that, right? So it's like things like that where like the Lord just kind of
Breaks you out.
yeah, he put like it's like a magnet, right? Like you're pulled to something, and I believe that's like the Holy Spirit within us, like, you know, interceding for us and acting on our behalf and guiding and leading us, and really it's that discernment, I think, to be able to say like when you feel like the Spirit leading you to do something that you know to be honoring and pleasing to the Lord, like don't get in the way, just do it.
Just go, just obey.
Yeah.
Man, that's huge. After that, man, I guess it's just I'm more entailed to ask you, what advice would you give to young entrepreneurs, struggling entrepreneurs that are not necessarily looking to do the same thing you're doing, but I mean just that are trying to break out of that 9-to-5 job, break out of the rat race, and not only just in business and financially, but like I said, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and just in their own lives. What advice would you give to people?
That's a good question. I think for me, I kind of take for granted sometimes like things that I feel are more common, and I'm realizing they're not as common. But I say that like certain personality traits or tendencies or behaviors, specifically, I'm someone who, like, if I'm getting interested in something and I'm doing something new, I will immerse myself into that world. I'll try to get around as many people as I can who are already doing the thing that I want to learn, and try to offer them value in any way that I can just to be around them. If I can take something off their plate and they're glad to have me around, then I can learn and emulate the things that they've done that are successful. And then the second thing is like it is insane the amount of access to resource that we have today. Like you can find any bit of information online and learn something where years ago you used to have to go, you know, maybe to a library and scour a section for books or take a course on it or a class or get a degree in like
Spend 3 days reading books.
Exactly, yeah. And now you can get like
bit.
ChatGPT, you can get summaries of things and
Just like that.
Exactly, like yeah, instantaneous. Like learn, and you're not gonna have a proficiency that would be the same as if you'd done it for 10 years, but you at least have enough to kind of get into it and get started. So I guess advice would be just like, whatever that thing is that you're trying to do, have the perspective of how can I come in and add value to those that have the knowledge I want to have so that I can be in proximity to them. I think a lot of people are kind of naive to think that, I'll just go and I'll ask people a bunch of questions. Like asking open-ended questions to someone who's already like busy of like, hey, how can I help you? Like they don't have the mental capacity to come up with a scenario where you fit in. So if you can think of something, if you can take the initiative to think of a way, like you see an opportunity to provide them with something that they might need, that's the in, not the almost like pestering type question of like, oh, hey, can you take everything you've learned over 20 years and condense it down for me in a little, right? But that would be one thing. And then the other thing is just like, this one to me is more general and even universal. It's like, just look for ways to serve people. I think like we're all people, we're all human. So like you said before, like we never know what someone's going through. Like I think at the same time, like we all want to be like, I think we all want to be able to contribute. And we appreciate when something is like genuine in nature. So if you kind of have that at the forefront of just looking for ways to serve and doing it sincerely, not with an ulterior motive, like I can't imagine that leaving a bad first impression. Right. So it may be oversimplified, but that would be the thing that I would do. The advice I would give.
Man, that's good. That's good. Thank you. All right, last question before we start doing the closings. Where do you see your growth going in the next couple of years with your business, and how do you see your faith playing a role in that?
Yeah.
And that kind of goes into the other question I was going to ask you too. How do you stay rooted in your faith? Like how do you stay consistent with just staying faithful and not giving up, and just consistently like aligning your decision making processes with God, like with every single decision that you make? Like how do you do it?
Yeah, this one's easy for me. I have a wife who keeps me in line. She's amazing. Like I said, I'm tolerable. She's a saint. But no, in all seriousness, she is a great partner. I am so blessed that the Lord has given me her as a spouse. That, Courtney is incredible. She'll call me on my BS real quick. Like, if my head's getting a little too big, she's real quick to bring me down to a level of humility. Even if I'm like not leading our family well, she'll call me on it. Like, hey, you haven't shown a lot of patience and grace to the kids lately, or like, hey, you're kind of walking around a little bit grumpy today. Like she is a great. She helps me with my blind spots, I would say.
I think it's good on the receiving end of that.
Yeah.
To not take that as like an attack.
Yeah.
And to get angry and blow up. Like that's something that a lot of people in marriage struggle with. I'm sure you guys have probably struggled with it a little bit, but even my wife and I, we've struggled with that a little bit as well, and it's really admirable for a man to take criticism and be able to use it in alignment with God, instead of allowing the enemy to convince us that that's an excuse to get angry and blow up and things like that. So I'm glad you shared that too.
No, I appreciate that. I learned maybe a handful of years ago now. It wasn't anything like one single moment. It was just kind of like this growth, right? Maturity that the Lord, like, and I'm not perfect by any means, but I think like if we aren't open to that critical feedback and that blunt and direct input, holding the mirror up to us sometimes, if we're not open to that, like, then we're like quite literally saying, my growth stops here.
Right.
It's like that, I think it's a stoicism quote, but I think it's more rooted like in biblical truths. But it's like, you cannot learn that which you think you already know. So, as soon as we are just kind of closed off to input, advice, information, anything, like we are limiting ultimately what I believe the Lord has for us on the other side of that.
Yeah.
And I'm far from perfect. Like, I still have my times where, like, my feelings might get hurt a little bit. I might get a little prideful. But I think on the other end of it, like, I can say with confidence that, like, those moments last, like, they're much shorter now. They don't last nearly as long, and they don't happen nearly as often.
Yeah.
So
and that kind of goes back into what you said earlier about, like, getting out of your own way, like how we get in our own way. And that kind of leads me into one more question. I'm sorry, before we close out. When it comes to, doing something, because I know you mentioned before, it's like, okay, well, I don't want to say that I'm just like this great person. I get that. Like, we don't want to glorify ourselves, but there's got to be stuff that we do to be able to get ourselves in the mental space and the mentality to actually open ourselves up to that, to get out of our own way. There's got to be stuff that we can do, right?
Sure.
And personally, for me, that's been like disciplining myself, like doing the things that I know I need to do, regardless whether whether I want to do them or whether I feel like doing them or not. And I feel like part of that goes into just something as simple as reading a scripture every day. What is it for you? What are some things that you did that in turn improved you and made you a better person?
Sure.
And made you more capable of becoming the success that you've become with your business and in your family and everything today?
Yeah, I mean, it's I would say like anything else, there are seasons, right? So it ebbs and it flows, and sometimes I'm better at them than others. But much to your same point, like to me it's those I'll call them like disciplines, right? Like, I know this definitively with myself. When I have a better routine, I'm in a better headspace. My patience is better. My optimism is easier to click into. And when I'm in a not so healthy routine, my sleep's not great, my nutrition's not great, my activity level's not great. Maybe I'm having a little too many, glasses of bourbon throughout the week. It shows up. Like my mood is affected, my mentality is affected. So not to say that those things are like the sole reason for the output. I think it's collectively just rhythm-based, habit-based, routine-based, those disciplines. And sometimes I'm momentum-driven.
It also talks about that in the Bible too. It says something about stay diligent with planning.
Yes.
Like a man without a plan is a man planning to fail.
Yep.
I don't know if it says that exactly just like that in the Bible. I don't know what scripture I was trying to look up, but I lost Wi-Fi. But anyway, it talks about having a plan in the Bible. And so a lot of people, they think of a plan, they're like, oh, okay, like what I want to do, where I want to be when I'm like 50, where I want to be when I'm like 60 or 70. Like really no, it goes into planning every single second of your days, like every day, planning out every day. And I can relate to that 100% because now it's like I've been a little bit more lenient on myself. I've been a little bit more lax. I've been procrastinating on planning lately, and what that does is it brings in this fog, man. It takes away the clarity, and I think having clarity in what you're trying to do really helps out a lot. And knowing that is a biblical principle, it makes it a lot easier to want to follow.
Exactly. And I think it was a couple of years ago. I was meeting with a guy who was kind of mentoring me at the time. And he used to say, nothing is wasted in God's economy. And I know, it's a phrase that, other people have said, but, in that season, what was really big for Courtney and I at the time was margin. We're big fans of Jeff and Alyssa Bethke. I've read To Hell with the Hustle, Take Back Your Family. He's got some really good lessons and material in books, but, one of the things I remember was him talking about margin, and we always think about, financial margin. Not living beyond our means, having enough money to be able to be generous and to be able to contribute. But margin is also with our commitments of our time. And they talk about with their family, they'll lay down on note cards on the table everything they're committed to throughout a year or a season, and they'll try to remove as many of them as they can because that gives them more margin.
Oh wow.
Yeah, if you're saying yes to everything, especially when you have kids and they've got sports and school and there's no room for you to be open. Where can God put something else in your life, for you to be serving or for you to be, compassionate and generous to something else that's not already committed to? So I took, we're not great at it. We still need some work. But looking at how can we not overcommit to things so we do still have margin? But yeah, it's both financial and with time.
Yeah, the time management, man. That's a tough one. Ed Milet talks about that one in the book. I think he talks about it in the book, right? The Power of One More.
I haven't read the book, but I've heard many of his interviews where he talks about
how he breaks down his days into I saw one they were joking about it, and this guy was like, man, you know what? He's like, I break my days down into seconds. He's like, and I've got 24,000 more days than you do. He's like, I'm winning. Because, Ed Milet, he breaks his days down into 3.
Yeah.
And he's like, hey, from morning to noon is one day, and then lunchtime is the second day, and then nighttime is the third day. He's like, by the end of the week, I've got 21 days, and you guys are working on 7.
Yep.
And that guy made a joke. I thought that was funny. But
clever.
No, the way he breaks it down and increments his time is you have more of a priority on what you're trying to get done. It's okay, well, if my day ends at noon, I've got to get to work. If my day ends at 5, I've got to get to work. So you're being a lot more productive. So I actually liked that perspective. I thought that was good because
deadlines are good.
Managing your time is hard. It's super easy for the enemy to bring in all these distractions and us to just, it happens on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly.
And we basically, like people say all the time, oh, I lost track of time.
Yeah.
I can't believe what time it is already. It's we lost track of time.
Yeah.
And it happens so often that it's normalized. People don't really think about it. And so what do you think about that?
No, that's good.
How do you manage your time?
That's something that it's funny, we joke about this, Courtney and I. I pick on her for not managing time well, and she reminds me that I may be a little bit too maybe uptight about my time. I'm not
Controlling?
Too controlling. Yeah.
My wife said that a few times to me.
if we have to go somewhere, and I think what she's doing is not a priority because we don't have much time between now and the time we need, but to her it is a priority, right? So like that's something that I've recognized is like I can't project the way I perceive these tasks in the allotted time to be the same level of priority that other people see them.
Right. Everybody has their own different priorities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's been helpful, and it's kind of given me a little grace, and it's given allowed me to give her a little grace on like how we approach things. But honestly, the big thing I'm working on is trying to break down my time, not just by being like, there's like busy and there's productive, right? Breaking it down by like, what are the things that are going to move the needle the most for me, for my business? What are the things that are going to move the needle the most for, the honey-do list at the house? Like, what are the most important things? And like, so long as I can commit enough time at the top for those things, there's a little bit less stress for the remainder. Because if those things weren't important to be at the top of the list, we're going to be a little bit more at peace if time does get away from us. Because I also try to like protect time, but leave enough of myself available to. I work from home most days, so if my kids need something during the middle of the day and I haven't like scheduled time to be with it, like I don't ever want to be. I don't want their memory of me to be like, oh, we can't bother Daddy while he's working. I want it to be like approachable. If I am working on something that's really important, I do communicate that with them. And I know this is a long answer to a short question, but I'm learning kind of when to push, when to pull, and like when to kind of have those protected times and when to be a little bit more lenient. But what helps me the most, because like my days can look different depending on, what projects are being worked on. A strategy and ideation day looks different than a production day, looks different than an editing day, looks different than a day of meetings. So just allotting time enough for those things based off of, what's actually going to move the business forward.
Right. That's good, man. I really appreciate you sharing that too, because I think that's one of the biggest struggles that people have is like, man, how am I going to have time to do all this? Be a father, be a husband, be a business owner, work your 9 to 5 while you're trying to build your business. Do your job at your 9 to 5 the way you're supposed to and still perform there so you can provide and then still be able to have fun in between all those things.
Yeah.
And so time management is huge. I'm glad that you touched on that. That's some good advice that the audience could use. I mean, because for me, it's like before I started getting into business, like time management.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Like that was never a thought that crossed my mind.
Yeah.
So that's a good one.
For sure.
But man, is there anything else you'd like to say to the audience?
This has been good. I think just like, I don't know, the thing I'm learning right now, the season I'm in right now, most is just kind of touched on it a couple times, but like that imposter syndrome, like the self-doubt, right? The questioning type mentality that happens really easily. I'm trying to combat that more these days with like remembering that like God's wired me a certain way. He's created me a certain way. So if I feed into that like doubt mentality and overly critical mentality, like that's essentially diminishing what He's created in me.
Yeah.
And just like trying to create space and protect enough space. I love creative things. I love things that are artistic. And I think for me to be able to be in that space and to create things that I'm proud of, like I need to have a protected like space to operate in. So all that to say, it's just kind of like remembering that whatever God's sown you with, whatever interests, passions, and skills He's given you with, like those are yours to steward, right? No one else has that combination of things with the life lived to this point, with the perspective and lens that you have. It's like all these factors together make it so that only you can do the things that you can do. And I'm trying to remind myself of that most days.
Man, I love how you said you don't feed that. Like, because I know we talked about like what can you do to strengthen your walk with God and strengthen your business presence and just strengthen yourself. in the eyes of God as a business owner, and how do you grow? Like, what are the things you can do to grow in those areas? But it's also, what are the things you need to stop doing?
Yeah.
And so I love how you said that, because when you feed the negative things, you are ultimately feeding the fire that's burning down the good that God has for you. So I'm super glad that you touched on that too. Man, I really appreciate you, bro, coming on and sharing your story, and everything that you shared was huge. So I'm super excited to get this one posted. Go ahead and let everybody, it's Maximized Media, right?
Yeah, Maximized Media Productions. Got
So
a YouTube channel, Facebook, got a website.
So what all exactly do you guys do?
Yeah.
What services do you offer?
Yeah, so this is fun because it's been kind of the last 6 months or so been changing a little bit. So we focus on creative ads and brand films as kind of like the top two, like those are the larger production offerings. And then kind of beneath that, what I refer to as hub content. So anything that's value oriented, creating content where you're sharing your expertise with your ideal audience. It's building credibility, it's establishing a rapport, just building that relationship. That's kind of the triangle of content that we operate within. But yeah, for a business that's maybe you've grown through word of mouth, through referrals, you're doing well, but maybe you're lacking in the video marketing department. Those are the people we work with best.
Cool, man. And I'll leave all of his business information and his YouTube channel. I'll leave all that. Just send that to me, text it to me. I'll put it all in the description below. Hey guys, if you haven't already, go ahead and get a hat. We still have some Kingdom Business Interview hats left that I'm selling, and this one's for you, Evan, for being on my podcast. And if you're a business owner and you're strong in the faith and you want to be on my podcast, you can get one for free. Nice. We'll get you set up. We'll get you going on an interview. But with all that being said, I really appreciate you guys watching and supporting the channel. Everybody that supported the channel, you guys are amazing. And thanks again, Evan, for coming on. And we will see you guys on the next video.